Welcome back to Mindset, Metabolism, and Movement, where we help you achieve a realistic and human approach to health and fitness. My name is Jenna Altman, and my mission is to help you, as an active woman, feel confident in your ability to actually make choices that allow you to take control of your own health and fitness. I'm excited for today's episode because we're going to talk about how can you stop tracking macros. And I know that that might feel a little like, ooh, I don't know if I can do that. I get it because you have seen progress by tracking your macros, but you also don't want to have to track macros for the rest of your life. So where do we go from here? This is the cool part about tracking macros is utilizing all of the food awareness that you've created and habitual awareness that you've created around your patterns of eating in order to depend and rely on your ability to actually eat enough food for your body without tracking macros. And so today we're going to dive into really how you can regulate your hunger cues through macro tracking and utilize those to help guide you beyond just tracking macros. In addition to that, we're going to talk about a lot of different strategies as far as how to actually wean off of macro tracking, how to remove this tool slowly but surely so that you feel confident removing it, right? We're not going to go cold turkey here. We're not going to just cut it out completely. We're going to give you some training wheels that we're going to remove throughout this process so that way you feel really, really good about doing so. If that's something you want to do. If you enjoyed tracking macros, I still encourage you to actually listen to this episode just to get a different perspective on things and make sure that your relationship with macros is in a really good place because it absolutely can be a tool that you utilize for the foreseeable future. But I just don't want you to become so reliant on it that you feel like there is no other way. So let's dive in. Macro tracking is something that I have utilized in my own journey for an extended period of time and something that as of this year, I really kind of started to let go. And I know for a lot of us, it might be something that we feel extremely overwhelmed when working on. And I want to kind of take that burden off of you. I want to give you other options. If you are at this point where you've been tracking macros for an extended period of time, I want to give you another way to look at things. This doesn't mean that you can't use macro tracking or that I'm against macro tracking because I do believe that is an incredible tool to help clients develop more food awareness. But at the end of the day, I don't want you to be reliant on this tool for the rest of your life. There are going to be seasons in your life where maybe macro tracking is extremely accessible to you. There are also going to be seasons of your life where it is impossible to possibly get macros tracked for the day. And so this episode is going to help you kind of cultivate an approach that feels good to you, something that you feel that you can commit to, and bring macro tracking back in when you need it and let it go when you don't. I don't want you to get stuck in this notion that you need to track your macros for the rest of your life because that is a really dangerous and slippery slope to be on. And something that I actually experienced when I first started tracking macros in 2018. So when I first started tracking macros, I was working with my first nutrition coach. And the experience for me was enlightening, honestly. And it probably was the most important component of my transformation of my relationship with food. Because I used to be somebody that felt like I couldn't eat XYZ because it was a bad food. And macro tracking for me allowed me to create this food awareness and understand that foods are broken up into proteins, fats, carbs, and that allowed me to then understand what foods I was putting into my body and what foods made me feel good without this fear over like, is this food actually good? Should I be eating this? Like, oh my God, I can't believe I ate a cookie, like feeling all this guilt around that. And so what was really cool about my macro tracking experience for me was how much I learned that my body needed food and macronutrients. Like I thought I was doing a good job with eating enough protein, but then when I started to track my food and pay attention to it, I was like, oh, wait, actually, there are days when I'm not paying as much attention and not being as proactive about protein in my meals. And that was something that really helped me to continually get enough protein in my diet through macro tracking. Similarly, I was kind of afraid of eating carbohydrates, which is something I know a lot of women experience. And so to have a carbohydrate goal for myself of 200 grams of carbs in terms of macros, and that was like the greatest day of my life. I was like, keep telling me to eat carbs. I am here for it, right? So it almost gave me this permission to incorporate these foods again into my diet. Similarly with fats, it was the same thing. I was afraid of eating nuts because I knew how high and calorie dense they were and didn't quite figure out how that fit into the picture. And so with this experience, I feel that I did obtain so much knowledge around what it looked like to fuel my body properly, to give my body the nutrients that it needed. But then there came a time where I felt extremely dependent on macro tracking in a very unhealthy way. I felt like if I was not tracking my macros or weighing my foods on a scale, then I had no idea what it looked like in terms of portions, in terms of how much food I was actually eating for the day. And I couldn't go a day without tracking my food. And I didn't know this at the time that you didn't have to track your food forever, right? I just understood that I saw progress while tracking macros. And so, how am I supposed to take that out of the equation if that's the only thing that has allowed me to see progress? And so, with that, I started to evaluate like, there has to be another option. There has to be another way. And this is a lot of the work that we do with our one-on-one clients as well, is really evaluating their relationship with macro tracking. And when they get to this point where they don't need it anymore, we start to implement some of these tools. So a couple of things that I want to discuss before we talk about like how to actually stop macro tracking, more on the logistical side of things. I want you, before you stop tracking macros, to pay attention to the portion sizes that you have. So instead of relying on your food scale to tell you the serving sizes, I want you to weigh out a portion of protein after you put it on your plate. So I want you to build your balanced plate and then go back and track the portion sizes. Okay, this is going to build confidence in yourself that you actually do have a lot of knowledge around portion sizes, even if we've been relying on the scale and macro tracking and putting it into an app. The other component that I want you to pay attention to and start paying attention to before you stop tracking macros is, hey, where are my hunger cues? Do I have them? Can I feel them? Do I feel full? Do I feel hungry? Do those things fluctuate throughout the day at a normal capacity, right? If you're constantly starving all the time, I would probably stick with tracking macros and really work through more of a reverse diet approach where we are getting you to this point where you're eating enough food for your body so your hunger cues are regulated. Similarly, if you are somebody who is excessively feeling overstuffed from macro tracking, right? You feel like you need to fit these foods into your diet in order to hit your macros, right? And then we're drinking a protein shake at like 10 o'clock at night. No. I mean, you can do that. That's fine. I support you no matter what you do, but don't feel like you have to do that. I think that sometimes we get really caught up in like, I need to hit these numbers and I need to hit these goals. And yes, of course, like we have goals, we want to hit them. But at the end of the day, it's just not conducive if we're forcing food down our bodies either. And so with this approach, it might sound a little, I want to just also, this is kind of like a side note, but something that's really important here to mention is maybe you're looking at intuitive eating and you're like, well, I want to do intuitive eating. That's where I want to get to. And guess what? There is no tracking in intuitive eating, right? Maybe you're tracking your hunger cues and things like that, but you are not tracking the actual food itself. It's kind of against the philosophy of it in terms of listening to your body. But if you have not tracked macros before and you're trying to go into intuitive eating, I'm a firm believer that you actually have no idea what your body needs. You have no idea what it's like to give your body the proper amount of nutrients and feel that energy, feel how good it feels to eat enough for your body. And so when we think about intuitive eating, if that is something that you're evaluating from your macro tracking, I think that it's important to take those hunger cues, the regulation of your hunger cues that you're working on with this macro tracking before we decide to stop. And that can help kind of carry you over into this more of an intuitive eating approach. But again, this is something where it comes back to like nothing is black and white in health and fitness. You can incorporate principles of intuitive eating, like paying attention to your hunger cues, honoring that, not tracking. But you can also implement elements of macro tracking, right? So making sure that most of your meals have a protein, making sure that you have balanced meals for most of your meals. So it does not have to be black and white. You don't have to cut macros cold turkey. And that's a lot of the tools that we're going to talk about here. So basically with that macro approach, now that you've been tracking macros for an extended period of time, you have the food awareness that you need. You just have to trust yourself that you have it. So the way that you go about this and how we help clients facilitate this, and honestly, it's how I went through my own journey of stepping back from macros was starting with an untracked meal or two. Just if you are used to tracking everything 100% of the time, let's just start with one meal. One meal. Don't track it. See how that feels. See what decisions you make. See what you put on your plate. See how you feel after that meal. Tune into those hunger cues. And then once you feel comfortable with one meal, I would challenge you maybe to stop tracking for a whole day. And again, stop tracking for that whole day. Pay attention to your hunger cues. Eat what feels good to you while also keeping your balanced plate and food awareness that you've already created from macro tracking in mind as well. And what's really cool about this approach is if you aren't really sure about how you're doing in terms of untracked meals, you can actually go back and log it if you want to. And that can also build that self-efficacy. It'll rebuild that belief that you are capable of eating enough food for your body without paying attention to macro tracking specifically. And so go back, log the meals after the fact, similarly to like we talked about in the beginning of the episode when we're thinking about coming off of tracking macros. Use those as a backup for you. If you're like, ooh, I'm not really sure where this kind of came out. Like, I just want to double check. Like, that's a good way to sort of check in with yourself. And then when you get to this point, you'll basically be at a really good place where you can utilize what I like to call more like skeleton meals, or even just like the balanced plate concept, right? So protein, fat, carb, veggie at all of your meals or most of your meals. And what I mean by skeleton meals is like, you have a protein goal of roughly 120 grams of protein as your goal. Divide that up among 4 meals. That is going to be 30 grams of protein at each meal. Obviously, that's not how you have to break it up, but that's just kind of a good way to sort of see what that looks like. And then at all of those meals, you can aim for 30 grams of protein. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the idea is that you're getting yourself towards that sort of number, utilizing those skeleton meals. And so once you've gone through this process and once you've kind of eliminated that macro tracking component with like such emphasis, and maybe you're just like doing it kind of intermittently, you can actually start to check back in with yourself. So you can utilize macros as a tool to check back in once a week just to see how we're doing, see how we're hitting that protein goal, which I know is a majority of the concern for most of my females. Make sure that carbs and fats are in check and just create some awareness for the week. Then you can maybe do it once a month. If you're so comfortable that you're like, I don't need this anymore, this is a great tool, I've gotten what I've needed from it, okay, then great. Let's actually use a monthly check-in. So you log your food for one day or maybe a couple of days, because obviously things vary from day to day. But this is sort of stepping away. It's almost like removing that pressure, everyday pressure of macro tracking, and just giving you the space to feel it out, right? So we're not cutting it to cold turkey. We're just slowly eliminating, using some steps, using all of the skills that we've already accomplished through macro tracking and putting those into action without the tool itself. And there is a time when I think it's a great idea to bring macros back into place. And this doesn't have to be for everybody. You can definitely go through a fat loss phase without tracking macros. But for me personally, one thing that I do if I'm in a space where I am looking to lose more body fat, I will actually bring macro tracking back in. So basically, I will set up myself up with macro goals. I'll probably track for a couple of weeks just to see where I'm at with things as far as like maintenance calories. And then from there, I'll actually take that number, calculate my deficit numbers, and then I will utilize macro tracking throughout that deficit phase. But again, just a tool that I bring back in every now and then. If I've noticed that I'm not feeling great for some reason, maybe I feel like, ooh, I haven't been paying as much attention to the foods that I'm eating. I've been slacking a little bit in terms of nutrient density and nutrient quality. That's a good time that I'll rope macro tracking back in just to like see where things are at. Am I getting enough fiber, right? If I'm experiencing some digestion issues, maybe it's time that I do track to just pay attention and make sure that fiber is in a good spot. So again, it's an excellent tool that you can bring back as you need, but it shouldn't be something that you are constantly relying on, because I think there's a danger when it comes to macro tracking. We can get in this place where we do not trust our own bodies to tell us when to eat or how to eat or what to eat. And that's dangerous because as children, we regulated our bodies naturally. If you see any child now, this was not always the philosophy that people stood by, but I have nephews, and when they eat meals, my sister in law and brother let them eat whatever they want in terms of the quantity because they have internal cues that tell them when to stop eating and when to keep eating. And we do too. As adults, we have these cues. We have just silenced them because for years we have been told you can't eat more than 1,200 calories. You can only eat at X times of the day. We've gotten this script that we now follow in terms of how we should eat. When in reality, ever since we were babies, our bodies knew exactly what we needed and we just weren't listening. And so, my invitation to you as you're thinking about this and reflecting on this concept is what is your relationship with macros like? Is it something that you feel extremely dependent on? Is it something that you feel like you will not make progress if you do not have this tool in check? That might be a really good time then for you to evaluate that relationship and maybe consider taking a break from macro tracking. Maybe you're in a season where you do need macro tracking and you want to incorporate that, and that's perfectly fine too. Maybe you've never heard of macros, and if you're listening to this episode, you can definitely shoot me a message. We can talk a little bit more about it. I assume that people who are listening do have a baseline knowledge of macro tracking, but if not, I want you to maybe start macro tracking, paying attention to how much protein you're eating. Maybe start a food journal just to see where things are at in terms of writing it down or tracking it in an app. I believe that everyone can get a lot of benefit from just creating some awareness around the foods that are going into their bodies. But regardless, I want you to know the main takeaway from this episode that I want you to leave with is that macro tracking is just a tool. It should not be forever. It shouldn't be something that we need to tell us vital information that our body actually knows, but we just haven't been listening. And so macro tracking can help you understand and start to listen and tune into your body. But then at some point, we want to let go of those training wheels. We want to trust ourselves that we know what our body needs. And when you can do that, all of the worry, all of the anxiety that goes around hitting macros or tracking your food or making sure that you're eating enough, all of that fades away because now you have this internal guidance system that will tell you if you're eating enough food or if you're not. And of course, using the tool as you need to, incorporating that as you need to, but trust that you actually know what to do with your own body. If you found this episode helpful, I want to invite you into an exciting opportunity that we have at Harvest Coaching. If you've been living off of 1,200 to 1,600 calories or less because you thought that's what you needed to lose weight, if you consider yourself a healthy eater but aren't sure if you're eating enough or the right foods for your body, if you want to learn how to work with your body and not against it, if you want to improve your relationship with food and incorporate foods you love without feeling guilty, then our signature one-on-one coaching program, M3, Mindset, Metabolism, and Movement, is for you. This is a fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle program that's designed to help you let go of all or nothing thinking, optimize your metabolic health, and gain more confidence. This program is right for you if your workouts leave you feeling drained, you're tired of wasting mental headspace thinking about food, and are overwhelmed by the abundance of contradicting advice. And you finally want to feel more confident in your body and the choices that you make in regards to your health and fitness. Then now is the time to apply to our signature M3 one-on-one coaching program. This is a no strings attached process, and all you have to do is apply. Even if you decide that it's not a good fit for you after our call, there will be no hard feelings at all. You'll at least get some guidance on what you can be working on from your health and fitness professional bestie. The link to apply is in the show notes.